Ready to roll? All right. Acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory of the Apala people. And ready to adopt agenda. Call to order. Adopt agenda,
I'll second that.
second, all in favor. Okay. And adoption of minutes from March the 28th, regular meeting. Moved, second. Okay. And all in favor. Minutes of the committee of the whole from April the 4th.
I'll second.
Okay. Okay. Correspondence from the Rotary Club regarding helping out with their expenses for Earth Day this month. Looks like they get charged a lot of money to do a good thing. So although I was way late today, I don't mind talking to 7 Mile and Patrick Donahue about that tipping fee. I'm sure we can help with that. Keep that off the table. And as for the, then that would just really help with the bin rental.
I move that we pay the rental fee for the bin and whatever you renegotiate for the 10 days.
Okay, that would be my darndest.
I'll second that.
Okay. Second, all in favor. Your darndest. Okay. And our reports. Visitor experience report. To be received and filed.
Motion to receive and file.
Motion for receipt.
I'll second that.
Okay, all in favor.
I just had a question. You don't have a date yet? The date was for Okafest?
Okafest is the
Or is it gonna be that third weekend in
Yeah.
August, like the
Yeah.
traditional? Okay,
certified chair, and there's also the races that.
Yes. Awesome,
Yeah, so
good.
Where the kind of items.
Just
Okay, all in favor of receiving and filing visitor info?
Yep.
That's right, okay. And the monthly harbor authority staff report. Discussion or questions on that one? All right, you see you can file, anybody move such?
I'll
Okay.
second that.
Public Works report from Julian Allen.
I will move that we accept and file.
I second that.
Any further discussion?
Summer students, have we started that hiring process yet?
Yeah, so through the chair, we've had our first 2 interviews today. The rest of the week is pretty full with what's happening in council chambers. That's for the visitor center, museum, Harper's Store, and as well, so I think that.
And pool.
And cool, yeah, it's all happening within the next 2 weeks, but to have a kind of startup onboard orientation in person, we'll be kind of barbecue and maybe the council, like to join us and meet our summer employees.
Excellent.
And more applicants than normal?
More applicants than normal, than we're forwarding on this year, which is considerably more than this year. So, yeah,
Attributable to,
we are still looking for like a guys though, so
I
like.
think it's the you guys went to the career fair, right?
Yeah, so Christina and Chris was the manager of visitor experience, they went to the job fair in Port Hardy. We also took a day to yes, and presented to the grade communities and events.
10, 11, 12,
I think 10 minutes, sorry. Yeah, and they stayed through the lunch hour too, to answer some questions and we had some great feedback from that, so. Great efforts from 600 people.
okay, we moving.
Is it to vote?
Okay, right, all in favor, right. We're good. Animal control report from Shari. Lots of details in there.
We'll proceed. A second.
Second, any discussion on the interesting things they do with Hardy?
Just, maybe more to CAO, everybody's kind of in agreement. We talked about this once before, but I'd kind of like to see a bit of a spreadsheet of sorts so that we have statistics that are actually consistent, because, 15 various reports to respond to roaming dogs, continued issues, one or over surrender. And as my colleague here said, is that 15 reports the same roaming dogs or those different roaming dogs? Just if we could have some consistent info, that would be grand.
We can do that. Just one question I guess I had that, we were giving some details as to how Port Hardy manages their animal control. What we don't have in comparison is actually the volume that they're dealing with as compared to what we have. So perhaps that information could be sought, just so that comparisons could be a bit more full or sure. Thank you.
All in favor of receiving this plan? Cool. Rogers Communications, land use request through the chair. Yes, sorry. Go ahead.
Chair, we have Brian Gray that's sent back for this as well, if there's any questions.
Okay.
Hello, Brian, can you hear us?
Good evening. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello? Uh-oh. Are we having a connectivity problem?
Do you not hear us?
I can hear you. Yes.
I'm right opposite the speaker, so.
Huh. I hear you.
Okay, can we establish you can all hear each other?
Hello, hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay. We're here.
Let's be in the affirmative on that. Okay.
Okay.
Wish to discuss, or were we looking for presentation here?
He's just there for any questions. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate the detail you went into, Brian, on the questions you did answer for us there.
So what is our
They're requesting
agenda?
reconsideration of the land use concurrence.
Do you want to just give us a refresher of where everything is at?
Sure, Brian, did you want to give a refresher or would you like me to do that?
Sure, yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. So, yeah, as noted, I didn't prepare a presentation or anything, but I can kind of walk through what's transpired to date and then I guess where we're at. And certainly if there's more questions, hopefully I can answer them. But yeah, effectively, I would say about a year ago, we set out on this process and we had secured a right-of-way agreement for the proposed facility at 430 Pioneer Hill Drive. And then through our pre-consultations with, I guess, municipal staff, we determined that we would need to set out on the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada default consultation process, which was basically newspaper notice, mail out and then appearing before council to request land use concurrence. But we didn't do just those bare minimum steps. We actually through your staff sent a preliminary letter, as was recommended, through to mayor and council at the time. I know there's been some changes there, but just as a refresher. So we did that as recommended, just to ensure that, hopefully there were no surprises with the proposal moving forward. We had received some comments back. We determined that we would, even though it's not required for a tower of under 30 meters tall, this one's only 20 meters, we did a newspaper notice. We doubled the mail out radius from 3 times tower height to which would have only been 60 meters to 120 meter radius. So we sort of doubled the federal guidelines. And then we also added, even though again it's not required, we did a digital public meeting just so that people could attend that session and ask any questions. So we did, I think we went above and beyond in terms of process at the time, given that federal process for a small monopole like this really didn't have a whole lot of requirements. So again, if we had just done the bare minimum, we wouldn't have even needed to do a newspaper notice, because this is quite a small pole. It's really only for towers over 30 meters tall that would have required that. So from the outset, we did try to propose, I think, the smallest possible structure to service the area. I don't think we've gotten carried away with a large tower structure in this area. We again went above and beyond, I think, in terms of our consultation process. And then the other, I guess, final point that I think is relevant here is we've also proposed to invest some additional capital in a monopole structure, which is basically the slimmest type of tower available to us. So we've tried to put our best foot forward in terms of this proposal, in terms of process, as well as the design. We did previously request land use concurrence, I guess towards the end of last year, or we wanted to do so rather. But during our public meeting, the prior mayor was there and thought that it would be prudent to, I guess, defer any decision making until after the elections. But what instead happened was, before the results of our consultation were shared through the municipality, the mayor and council of the time, before reviewing any of the public input, decided to make a preemptive decision and gave us a letter of non-concurrence, which we found rather perplexing, because we thought it would be more appropriate for a decision to be made once all of the public comments had been received and the results of that consultation had been shared. So all of this has now been done. We've passed all of that over to you, and I understand that this was sort of briefly discussed at a prior council meeting, but no decision was made, and there were a number of questions, which, as Mayor Fernie mentioned, I did answer via email. So I think that's where we're at. And now, in order to conclude the process officially, as per Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada requirements, we are required to request this motion or letter of land use concurrence as to whether or not the municipality is in support of this proposal. So that's pretty much it at this point, and I'll hand it back to you for any questions or comments.
I'm just curious, you said that you went above and beyond and more than you needed to, and these things. Why did you do that?
We did that because basically, well, first, we think it's the right thing to do. It's a really small pole, and as a result, I guess you could say there's sort of a process incentive or less consultation required. But I just thought, we're not going to win any points by being seen to do the bare minimum, especially in a tightly knit community like yours, where people talk about things like this, and And we just thought, we have nothing to hide here. Why don't we just put it in the newspaper? It's not required, but let's do it. Let's make sure we get the word out. And you know what? Let's do a public meeting too, and try to get as much input as possible. And so that's really what we tried to do. And the hope was that we could point back to good process at the end of it all, and sort of say, look, we tried to do the right thing here. We got the word out as much as we could. And despite all of that, I'm not sure if you saw our prior land use concurrence request report, but there was not a high degree of public interest or concern in the proposal. So I think that's the other important thing to note here. So even though we did expand the mail out, we did do the public meeting, we did do the newspaper notice, there was actually a pretty small number of people that even really bothered to comment on it.
Can you speak to how many people were opposed to this in the initial consultation?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to open up this. I don't have that report in front of me. I'm just opening it right now. And hopefully that has been shared at a prior council meeting with you all. I did send that. I'm looking here in December, and it had all of the comments that we received and all of our responses provided. But I summarized it as well. But I'll speak to it here now. Just opening it up.
And your public meeting was at a certain time to a certain time where most people weren't even off work? Was that, could you confirm what time that was at?
Yeah, sure. So to your first question, we received inquiries from 6 community members. So despite doubling the mail out, doing the newspaper notice, and hosting a meeting, we heard from 6 people. Of those, one, and this is all in this report, I could resend that if it's not in your file there. 1 indicated support, 3 stated concerns or opposition, and 2 didn't have any position. They just asked for details to log into the public meeting. And so, as you can imagine, it's hard to draw conclusions from that, right? But I will say this. When proposals are poorly considered, we will hear from people. If it's a bad proposal from a land use perspective or something that people find to be offensive, we tend to have a very large turnout, sometimes hundreds of people. So while this lack of response is hard to maybe draw broader conclusions from, I do think it does tell you something in terms of it wasn't a particularly controversial proposal, and I don't think there was any secret about it. So that was, at least that's what we found. In terms of the public meeting, to be honest, we do these we've done them dozens of times. It was hosted from 5 to 6 p.m. September 22nd. That's generally the time slot that we do host those meetings, so it's intended to be after work for people. We posted it in the newspaper and in our mail out package, and I think it was the small number of people attended, actually the former mayor and I think one of the councillors of the time. So that was the result of the process. Certainly, I guess we could have hosted it at a different time, but I think it was a Thursday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. And we did share our consultation materials with the municipal staff at the time. So I guess if there had been a preference for a different time slot, we would have been more than amenable to do that. But this is fairly typical for these types of meetings.
Brian, again, what is the advantage to our EMS system? Because when you first brought this to us, that was part of the selling point, was that it was going to improve things, but I haven't been able to get a straight answer of what kind of support that's going to get, or what kind of support, or at least it's not straight in my mind, of what we need this for.
So sorry, which system? Like an emergency response system? Is
Well, I
that-
don't know.
is that what that is?
That's what you guys were selling when it first came to council, was that putting up this tower was gonna enhance our, I'm assuming our 911 system, but you said it would enhance our first responders. But I've never got a clear answer on how that's gonna happen.
Oh, okay.
So
Happy
that's
to
what I'm
provide that answer. So every single cell tower anywhere supports calls to 911. And you don't even have to be a subscriber to the wireless network in order to benefit from that. You just have to have a phone that's charged. So even if you're not subscribed to Rogers or Telus or whatever carrier, if there's cut cell service, you know, those cell towers will support 911 calls. So I think that's just a general benefit, and we always speak to that because I think the statistic is that greater than 80% of calls to emergency responders, including 911, are placed through cell phones. So, you know, we're not trying to promote that in a cheeky way. It's just sort of, I guess, a modern day reality that, you know, if somebody injures themselves or has a heart attack or an incident out on the water or whatever, most people, you know, the first thing they do is look for their cell phone to call for help. It's not unique to Rogers. It's just that's how it works on, you know, the cellular network generally. And I think it's a benefit worth noting. So that's why we brought that up. It's one of those things.
911, do we get there dropped with the current system that we have?
Yeah, I'm not by any means an expert on your existing emergency response system or 911. I just don't have access to the data of the blocked calls that you would have through 911. But there is a third party agency, I think it's like called E911, that would maybe keep track of all of that kind of data, because they actually have their own antenna systems that helps host all of those calls. So we could certainly ask them. But, you know, we're not really trying to push it for that reason. It's just, you know, an additional ancillary benefit of having reliable service is it's a benefit that for public safety as well. But really the primary reason, putting that aside, if that's not compelling for you, is the primary real reason for Rogers customers specifically is it's to provide high band service in the downtown core, right? Which is basically to improve data throughput for people. And those types of radio frequencies don't travel as far. So you can't just have one tower, you know, way out on the fringe of town and provide people with reliable data throughput and support the latest devices. You have to have, you know, basically in communities, a facility like this closer to the end users or the primary population base. So that's the sort of objective of this facility. So that's the truth, and that's really why we're proposing it here, and really in a whole host of other communities, as are the other service providers. So it's not particularly unique to Port McNeill. I think you'll find that this is the type of infrastructure that will ultimately be proposed in effectively every community.
Question. So if you recognize that we need to have a 5G tower in our downtown core to improve service, and the radius or the area that is able to service is limited, why are you only proposing one tower and not blanketing the town with towers if your intent is to improve 5G service? Bring it here for our benefit.
So the tower should be sufficient. Port McNeill's doesn't cover a very large area. The coverage from this tower should serve the purpose that it's intended to do, which is sufficient to the best of our knowledge. So I don't think there's a need for, in a town the size of Port McNeill, you know, for the foreseeable future, additional facilities. So yeah, that's the honest truth. We would tell you if we were aware of other such plans.
That there are dead zones above town. And the question was asked, why locate it where you've chosen, where there is adequate coverage? Granted, it's another carrier, but why not move it to a different elevation in order to ensure that, you know, the areas, the job sites above town do have improved coverage, and the highway as well.
Yeah, so again, this is for improving data service in the downtown core of Port McNeill. those frequencies don't travel very far. And so unfortunately, if we were to put it further on the fringe and closer to some of those job sites and other locations that we previously discussed, the signal would be degraded in the primary sort of target area that we're trying to cover, which is really the core sort of busiest business node of Port McNeill. This isn't really a facility that's intended to expand coverage. It's more to add capacity and data throughput in your downtown core. I think this will be vitally important for economic development and really to keep your modern economy moving forward. And I think you'll come to find pretty soon that it's kind of like a basic utility infrastructure that's going to be in every community. So I think it's a good opportunity. It's a substantial investment, and it'll keep Port McNeill competitive for years to come.
Would it be fair to say that really what this tower would do is ensure that we have consistent, reliable Interact service in our downtown commercial core?
Oh, it'll certainly support that. I mean, that's not the only thing, but I would say that would definitely be one of the major benefits for sure. But at the same time, a lot of transactions are done wirelessly and can be hosted through wireless networks, but also certain transactions are connected, through physical cable or fiber and so on and so forth. So I think it'll depend on what type of system people are connected to. But if you're alluding to Rogers' very unfortunate network outage last year, as you can imagine, a lot of planning has gone into making sure that kind of issue doesn't happen again. But certainly improving the infrastructure is something that Rogers, and through its recent acquisition of Shaw, is very much wanting to do. So I recognize it's really not, it's just something I'd like to touch on too. Pardon me. Increasingly, my job is it's getting more difficult because historically, when all we were doing was providing cell phone service for people to make voice calls, we could have that one tower like we currently do, on the fringe of the community outside of where most people live and work. And frankly, it was pretty easy to site that infrastructure, right? Like people are, a lot less concerned or less worried about the siting of it, the visibility, and so on and so forth. As we move forward delivering this high band service and data service, which by the way is largely driven by demand, most people have an iPhone or a smartphone or a device that uses a lot of data. We're having to site this infrastructure closer to the end users in the downtown core areas of communities where people live and work, and it's in much more visible locations. So I recognize it's a lot more difficult, and we have to be a lot more thoughtful with how we do that. So what can we do, and how does that tie back into this discussion? What we've tried to do here is propose the smallest possible tower. It's literally the smallest tower that I'm currently proposing in all of BC, and I'm not making that up. It's also a slim monopole design, which is the most stealth type of structure we have. So trying to be respectful aesthetically in terms of the scale and design. And then we've also selected a property that's industrial zoned or light industrial zoned. So not suggesting that it's something that everybody might be happy about. It is a utility structure, but it does provide a critical service. And I think we have sort of done the best we can with the scale and design and siting of this infrastructure for Port McNeill. So that's what we've tried to do, kind of do the best we can with the things that we can influence. But if there's things we can do better, certainly interested to hear it. Just not too sure what else we could do if we're going to deliver this service.
I just was wanting to touch on a few people that did complain, that wrote in complaining about this or their worries and health concerns. And we also asked about that, and your guys' response to that was to kind of just, we will comply and here's a link to look at. I'd like to hear from you guys directly that nobody's gonna die of cancer from this pole being put downtown Port McNeil?
So the reason we reply the way that we do, there's several reasons. I guess the first is it's a regulatory requirement that we follow the Health Canada Safety Code 6, right? So it's basically, effectively, it's the law. So it's taken seriously. They set the code. Health Canada, they are public health experts and the policymakers, and we are not. I have absolutely no background in medicine or public health, and I think it would be very misleading and inappropriate if I were to present myself as a health expert and to come to your council meeting tonight and try to sort of advise you on public health matters. It would be totally outside the scope of my authority and expertise, and we effectively, legally speaking, have to defer to Health Canada. So that's why we do that. And Health Canada does have, a stringent safety code. And again, we have no choice but to follow it. So what we always sort of say to people when they have those questions is, we attest that we will comply with the safety code to give people assurance. It's taken very seriously. And then if people want to debate the safety protocol, it's explicitly set out in the Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada protocol that we have to follow, that we are not authorized to do that. And then I would really just refer you directly to the policymakers at Health Canada, right? So it's not that we're afraid to discuss it. It's taken very seriously. This facility will easily comply with that safety protocol, just as all of the existing similar facilities that are already in Port McNeil do comply with the same safety code. So I'm not really sure how we could respond to that any differently. I've provided people with links from the policymaker that break it down in very technical terms as well as in layman's terms for people to understand from the perspective of Health Canada how that works. My final comment would be, even if I did try to delve into those topics, I don't think that people would find it very relevant or credible for someone representing Rogers to try to explain the safety protocol. I think it would be a lot more relevant to hear it directly from a public health expert and an agency of in the government that is tasked with protecting the public health of Canadians, rather than from a service provider like Rogers.
Thank you.
Welcome. Yeah, I think we could do better on that on some level. My feeling is it's tempting to go down the path of trying to dissect all of that with people, but I've found it. I've gone down that path a few times before, and it can be a fairly fruitless debate. People tend to come with a lot of preconceived opinions, whatever they've searched online, and again, frankly, people aren't going to, and rightfully so, people aren't going to take it from me, someone representing Rogers or a wireless carrier, how they should behave or what information they should believe to be healthy, right? You should talk to a medical professional or Health Canada about those kinds of matters. Someone who has a relevant medical background. I find it a little bit perplexing that people would even want to hear from me about that, other than for us to commit to complying with the safety code. Just as an electrician complies with the electrical code or a carpenter complies with the building code, we have to comply with Health Canada's Safety Code 6. Sorry, I think I cut somebody off there. I'll stop speaking now.
Okay. What are we gonna do with all that information, folks?
I still question the location of it, to be honest.
So my kind of thoughts with the location, I would rather see it there than in residential neighborhoods. If we don't really have a choice, it's federal jurisdiction, correct? At least we can kind of steer them in a way we want them to to go. I thought about the health safety, like the 5G, I mean, new cars have 5G technology and the cell phones have, if you're carrying a cell phone around in your pocket, you're being exposed to all sorts of things too, right? So safety, I mean, I'm not a doctor, I can't speak to that, but as long as it's really anything causes cancer these days.
Yeah, I just thought that if they're the ones building a tower, that they have some information to share is, instead of just, we have to abide by this code. So it's a low frequency then, so over time, if you live beside it for 60 years, you'll die from it. Like, it was just, those are concerns that our townspeople are having. So I just thought that we'd get a little bit more information, but yeah, I guess go to the link.
So maybe a thought, had this property been rezoned to commercial, which was originally proposed, this conversation,
It would be happening.
it would, they wouldn't be looking to cite it there at all. So. You know, it wouldn't even be a discussion, we wouldn't be talking about. But we'd be doing a rezoning.
It just seems difficult to, like, I understand all of this, but it seems difficult when we have a population of over 2,000 people and this is gonna serve maybe 600 in the summer and it's all downtown. So it's not serving us year round unless everyone downtown is a Rogers. You know, like at your business, is it Rogers or if you're, yeah, so,
Well, no, Rogers is Interact.
yeah, okay, yeah. So
Yeah,
then-
no, Interact,
That's like,
Rogers has a contract.
does yours go down often at your store?
It did in July,
Yeah.
everybody
Everybody did.
across the country.
Yeah, that yeah.
I guess I feel like what else is there? Because to have one tower in one spot to serve 1/4 of the population, feels like should be the rest of the story we don't know yet, Brian, is this
I don't-
also to just?
I don't think so. Like, if there's more, the honest answer, and I sort of tried to convey this in my email, is like, I've provided you with the feedback that I got directly from Rogers' engineering team. And at this
Yeah.
time, this is all that is planned. And that's for the foreseeable future. And that's pretty common of a community of this scale. It's not to say that for like all of eternity that the network won't evolve. I'm sure that when Rogers proposed that initial tower that's already there, whenever that was 20 plus years ago, that they probably thought that would be sufficient, right? And demand changes. I don't think anyone ever anticipated that the demand for data would be growing as exponentially as it has probably in 10 or 20 years ago. So I'm not trying to mislead anyone and say, 100% we guarantee that this is the only facility that Rogers will ever propose again in Port McNeill. But at this time, this is the only proposal that we're aware of for the foreseeable future. And in comparable communities, it has been sufficient to offload that demand and to deliver great service in a community like Port McNeill. I know that the other service provider in the area has taken a different approach, which is the small cells, right, which are down a lot of the streets there. So, I mean, frankly, you already have very similar or the same types of radio frequencies operating in the community. It's just a different network infrastructure, and that was done by the other provider because they have, like a fiber network there, and they can plug those little small cells into the fiber and then deliver wireless signal that way. So it's effectively the same. It's just a different architecture. We're proposing one pole, the other provider who run it down every street. Rogers, doesn't have that fiber backbone in the area and doesn't have the opportunity to do that at this time. So this is the way that Rogers is able to deliver service in a place like Port McNeill. And, we wouldn't be proposing this investment if we thought it was going to be insufficient and that we were going to have to come back in the near term and alter it in some way. So I think that's the honest answer. That said, if we put it in and there's a bunch of complaints and coverage gaps and once in a while there'll be a little, we've put in these facilities and people will call in and say, my place over here still has terrible coverage. There are ways that we can infill that with small installations, but that's definitely not the goal. We would love for this to be sufficient and believe that it will be for the foreseeable future. that's the best information that I have available. And I think if anyone told you otherwise, you know, pretending to have a crystal ball of what technology is going to look like for the next 30 years, it would probably be someone who was trying to mislead you. I just find that the technology and demand and the types of devices people are using is always changing. So we might not have all the answers, but for now, for the foreseeable time period, this is all that Rogers has planned for your community.
Question for the mayor, is the RD working with Rogers to try and improve any cell service along our highway? I understand they own the repeater sites up and along the highway that would allow for it, but they choose not to activate them. Is there any conversation?
I'd say it comes up in conversation regularly, and we're waiting for the who's to lay the golden egg. But with this recent announced funding from one of the northern,
But it's not us.
it is us. Yeah, they have that Northern Economic Trust has assured that every highway in the province will have coverage, including us.
Yeah, I could foresee that, like, coverage outside of the community. Like, those discussions are constantly evolving through external funding agencies like the one you mentioned. I think it's the Northern Development Trust, and the Universal Broadband Fund, I think, is a federal one, and they're looking to provide coverage in underserved areas, including highway corridors, Indigenous communities, and so on and so forth. So, you know, that's constantly evolving, and, you know, we can't predict what the government will do. Even the CRTC has gotten involved to fund broadband and wireless expansion into underserved areas. But, you know, this for the purposes of within your municipal borders. And that was the question that I asked. This is all that I'm aware of. But I think if there are requests for service, that's a totally different discussion that I might not be directly involved in as a consultant. Like if there's a desire to express to, you know, Rogers or another service provider that there's a need for more infrastructure and service and along the highways coming into the community or other areas, such as some of those outlying business areas that you mentioned that are currently underserved. I'm sure Rogers would love to hear about that as well. I just don't want to give a false impression that, you know, at this time that there's other plans or that, you know, there's all these additional tower plans looming. That's not at all the case. I think I would know about it. But yeah, those things do sometimes change.
So this is not.
Sorry.
Correct, all the communities have similar.
I'm so sorry, I didn't quite catch the first part of that.
It's not the only community that this is happening in on the north end of the island. There's other communities that this is being proposed.
Oh yeah, no, this is absolutely not the only community at all. I would say the vast majority of communities will be either have received or will be receiving similar proposals in due course. The other interesting thing that we haven't discussed tonight, and the honest answer is I don't know how this is all going to roll out. As you all heard, Rogers acquired Shaw, and that will, I think, greatly enhance Rogers' ability to roll out service upgrades in places like the Northern Island, where Shaw has had either a fiber network or a cable network that Rogers can tie into. And historically, that's been a major disadvantage for Rogers compared to TELUS, because TELUS, you know, has a fiber network and that backbone to tie its cell sites into, and so on and so forth. And Rogers never did. So that could change things a lot as well. And I think there's been a number of communities where projects have been kind of either planned or sort of gotten to a certain stage, but then got put on hold because there was no, you know, fiber network to tie our infrastructure into. So I think you might see quite a bit of change coming and more activity from Rogers, but I don't think anybody at my level knows exactly what that's going to look like just yet, because that merger was just announced, as you know, last week, and those companies haven't even really fully come together yet. Like, we're still getting emails about, you know, how to manage internal processes and who to email. So we'll see how that goes. So that's the other aspect of all this. I think there will be some uncertainties for a period of time as well as to how that looks. But overall, it's going to be a major benefit to enabling Rogers to roll out better service.
May I ask why for Sontula, you guys are proposing a 35-meter tower if they're way smaller than us?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So it often comes down to topography and just coverage projections. That's what it comes down to. There's a radio frequency engineer assigned to each file. They design the network, and then they create a document called a search map, which basically dictates an approximate geographic area where they would like to have the infrastructure, as well as the needed height. And then for each location, we ground truth it with a site visit. We fly a drone, do a tree height survey, and figure out how tall the facility needs to be based on all those variables. So, it'd be based on basically topography and those factors that I just mentioned. I could ask the engineer on file, like why specifically Sontula's proposal is slightly taller than Port McNeill.
Well, we're definitely more on a hill, and your 20-meter is literally for the downtown core for us. And then Sontula, if a 35-meter is probably gonna service their entire island.
No, it won't. I got the coverage maps today. I'd be happy to share them with you, but the Sontula one, just as a reference point, I think it's kind of a good talking point. The engineer estimates cover a 3-kilometer area and then have some spillover coverage onto the waterways. And that's by no means all of Malcolm Island. That's really just the populated area, the downtown area and along the water there. So it's kind of a similar application where basically there's already some coverage there. You can make a voice call in much of Sontula, but this is another high band proposal to improve data throughput in that downtown area for most of the households. It's not really intended to expand general coverage for cell phone use. It's really to improve data throughput and speeds in the kind of core area of that community. So it's very similar, slightly different design. Actually, if I may, the proposed tower, the monopole that's only 20 meters in that we're discussing here tonight for Port McNeill is much smaller and a more attractive structure type. And, perhaps the proposal in Sontula could be, we could go back to the drawing board on some of that stuff too and see if there's a different design there. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the proposal here is in many ways, the zoning is industrial, maybe the best possible siting. It's just the smallest possible tower. It's the most stealth type of design. It's a monopole instead of a lattice structure, which we're proposing in Sontula, and the list goes on. So it's a good comparable and also a good in terms of use, but also a good way to demonstrate why this proposal is actually, I think, as best as it can be compared to other similar proposals. So again, as I mentioned earlier, this is our smallest tower that I'm proposing on our whole network. It's true. In Sontula, the tower is also one of our smaller towers, but it's almost double the height.
I have one more question with the monopole design. Do winds play a role in that with the velocity of the winds that we get? North end of the island?
So my understanding is for each site, we have a structural engineer that designs the tower, and they look at all the different conditions, including wind and snow loading, based on specific geographies. And different communities have different requirements for that. We also do a geotechnical analysis. We check the soil conditions. We actually have a small drill rig that'll go out and take a soil sample where the foundation's going. So all these factors combined dictate, the size and type of the foundation. Basically, we can do a monopole or a self-support tower, I think, effectively anywhere. What it really comes down to is how deep and how big does the foundation need to be, is my understanding of really typically what it comes down to. And then the costs associated with that. As I sort of mentioned, actually the guide towers with the wires and anchors are the cheapest. You build them taller and support them at a much taller height with less steel. And then the lattice towers are next. And then it's the monopole design that we're proposing it's substantially more costly because I think it's basically more steel and slimmer. So you need a deeper, more fulsome foundation down below grade. So we're proposing here kind of it's a bigger investment, but it ends up being, I think, a more aesthetic type of a pole. Why did we propose it? I guess because I think it's a good solution in a core downtown area where people are going to see it. And I think that if this goes ahead, you'd find that it's kind of like a ubiquitous type of structure that I don't think people will hardly even notice it at all. It's kind of a typical utility pole. I don't think it'll stand out. It's not very big. I mean, most of the mature trees are twice as tall as this tower.
If the 35-meter tower only covers 3 kilometers of service, how much does a 20-meter tower cover? How far?
I'll have to get you a coverage map for this particular one. But the engineer did comment at our public meeting, and I think I might even have those on file here. Pardon me.
Just wondering if
It's comparable
from that space to the ferries.
Yeah, that's a good question. On here, I do have coverage maps, I think. I don't have them on me right now, pardon me. But I know our engineer at Rogers did say, I recall him saying approximately 3 kilometer radius. So I'm thinking the coverage area was quite similar. And then that's always an estimate because there's always spillover coverage from there. So basically what they were trying to do is cover the vast majority of households in the downtown and core area with the facility. And the tower of a lesser height can sometimes cover the same area. It just depends on the topography, right? So I could get you some coverage maps that would probably speak a lot more intelligently to it, but those maps can be pretty misleading too, because a lot of them just show service or no service. But if you want to break it down properly, there's also what's the signal strength, because there's obviously a lot of degrees in between. And what frequencies are we talking about? The other thing is, for these high band towers where we're adding capacity for data, it's a lot harder to map out graphically because you already have coverage, but we're adding another frequency band for data throughput. So how do we map that out for you? Well, it's like another layer on the map, if you see what I mean. So there's a lot of ways to break this down, and how do we do that for people in a way that's not confusing? I'd be happy to follow up with, I guess we could provide you with several maps that show, one would be signal strength, and then there's frequency type, and then there's, coverage versus capacity. I digress, but if you see what I mean, it's
Yeah, I was just curious. I would like to know, because a 35-meter tower, you said it will go 3 kilometers. So 20-meter, I just like to know, because you're saying that you're gonna be providing service to the ferries. So,
Right.
If we can see that information where it shows, yes, this is what it's going to service, because that's what it says, then that would be great.
Yeah, no, for sure. We can definitely provide some additional information, but I have every assurance that it's going to cover the downtown area and the ferry and the vast majority of the population. So if we thought it needed to be taller, we would have proposed it.
Conversation then, folks. Have we got all we needed to gather, other than some more information to come?
Yes.
If we're waiting for we're waiting for the information to come, are we motioning to table this then until we get that information? Or is somebody motioning to do something?
I think we're looking for a motion to table until we have the coverage map.
You know,
That
like
be
that,
the appetite?
sure.
Okay,
I will second that.
move second. All in favor? Okay, we'll table. Brian, thank you very much for all this time you've put in with us this evening and your thorough answers and explanations to us.
So, thanks. So is it okay if I comment?
No, I'm kidding. Yes, please, go ahead.
I mean, the basis for tabling it again for the third time, I guess, or second time in this case, is because of a coverage map.
Looking for your coverage maps.
Okay, I'm pretty sure we had provided those previously, but so the coverage maps will show you that it covers all of the core area of Port McNeill. Like Rogers would not be proposing a big investment. Like these towers on average cost about $1.5 million. If we thought that we were going to be missing the mark somehow and not covering the vast majority of the households and businesses in the area. So totally understandable. We'll provide that information. I'm just sort of wondering, I guess, from my perspective, given the multiple trips to council, to sort of to what extent that would even ultimately change the decision in some form. Because we're going to be showing you that it will cover all of the areas that Rogers is intending to cover, which is effectively all of the people that live in the core area of Port McNeill. So I guess I'm just kind of at this point wondering how this would potentially influence the decision, and what the next step would be then. So we provide a coverage map and then come back to council. And then what would you want to see on that coverage map to get to a positive decision? Like we can show you it covers everybody.
You keep saying cover the households. There's no households in the core. Like there's no houses down there. So that's kind of an issue right there, is like we just want to know where this coverage is gonna be. And I'm sorry if you have already provided it. I've never seen it. I'm new to council this year. There's three of us that are new. And I'm sorry that you will have to provide that again, but we need it. But there are no households in the core. So what you're trying to do is improve businesses, by the sounds of it to me. So it is a big decision because this is our community. And I think it's fair that, sorry, but yes, we need to talk about it and get more information.
So it will provide coverage to businesses and households because it provides a multiple kilometer coverage improvement for data throughput. So it's not going to be just the businesses, although that's the core of the coverage area. There will definitely be coverage, spilling out into the suburban areas that are not that far behind up on the hillside. So certainly we will provide you with that follow-up information. Absolutely. I totally understand that. At the same time, it does sort of feel like this decision, for whatever reason, we've provided quite a lot of information. I've been answering questions. It's appeared before council 3 times, and it just seems like there's a reluctance to make a decision. And I'm not totally clear as to really if there really is a gap in information here, or if there's just a desire to punt the decision again. In any case, I won't push it any further. I think I've heard you clearly, and probably it's best to defer it so that maybe we can, hopefully get to a discussion around material items like coverage and get to the bottom of those questions. And I would just finally like to say, if I could please attend the council meeting whenever you're ready to make the land use concurrence decision, I would truly appreciate that.
Okay, Brian, thank you. And I will add, you did reply to us on the 29th of March. So, and your opening word was pardon our delay. So as a matter of fact, you're not lumping the blame for the delay or punting this decision down the road. You've made our agenda at our first meeting after we received this. So
Absolutely. No, I hear you.
you've been well treated as you have.
And you spelled Port McNeil wrong.
Take offense.
I do.
Well, no, I appreciate that. Thanks for the feedback. And yeah, no, just to clarify, you all of everyone I've dealt with has been very kind and more than fair. So no, nothing. Not trying to express any sort of issue with that whatsoever. It's more just, I guess, just to be honest. And pardon me if this sounds in any way off-putting, but we have a lot of work to do in a lot of communities. And there's only so much capital and time, and the investments tend to go in areas where there's a desire for the investment in the infrastructure, and that's a reality, especially in today's environment with rising interest rates. The economy is not all that great, right? So I just wanted to say, there's at some point, I'm just not sure how many more times I can keep coming back with more information. So if there is an interest in upgrading service.
Okay, that works. That's pretty effective. I don't do that. What do you think we are, tasks? Okay. All right, I can see where some of the delays may be coming from. Right. Did we have an appetite to receive and file? Or sorry, not receive and
We've
file.
already tabled it.
We've already tabled
Yeah. We'll be on our next.
So I'd like to move bylaw 718-2023 for second reading, please.
Second,
I'd like to hear from Brian.
second,
Seconded, all in favor? Okay.
Just a question. When this was first presented to us, I think that staff had asked us to go further, 3 readings. So I'll ask again, is there appetite to move this for a 3rd reading tonight as well? I'll move it for 3rd.
I'll second it for 3rd.
Yeah.
I just had one question and that was for staff. I know McElhaney's worked with us on this, but do you feel like this is a manageable process? As the last thing we want is to become our larger neighbor to the south where stuff can't get through.
So through the chair, Christina has been working with our planner and this process and their new application process as well. And it seems to be working well. If anything does come up, we do find it's not working best, we'll take those notes and come back. There is no amendment, but I think for now, we do have some variance permits coming forward, different things from here. So I think having this bylaw in place will better help support that.
So we had a first and I motion a second here for 3rd.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all in favor? Great. A motion to go in camera?
Second,
Okay.
Do we have to read that? Do we have to read that out?
Yeah. All right.
Henry?
Question period from the public? Anything out? Peter, Tina?
How many Rogers customers are there actually in Port McNeil?
He can't answer that. Like, he can't.
Oh,
I'm sure there would actually be more, I think, if the structure, like the,
it would give people an
if
option.
we give people an option, it's looking at competitiveness, I guess. So TELUS isn't the only option that we have right now.
I was
So-
given a tester phone from Rogers, it was a few years ago now for corporate. And you drove downtown with it and you lost from the Dalewood down. It was spotty, and we chose not to, we were Bell at the time, and we chose not to leave to go to Roger. They gave us a very competitive package, but the signal was crappier than crap, and yet out in the back of the Carnoots and the Rogers phone worked and the TELUS phone didn't. And that was probably about 10 years ago. But I imagine if they get this in, they will probably do a promotion and just like Telus did with the optic, we all got incredible optic deals when it went in, and I'm sure it would give them a bit of an advantage to be able to do that, and for some people, it might
I
be a
could
very
see,
attractive
like,
thing for consumers. For consumers, yeah.
yeah, and the data is a big one, like, I mean, there's not a lot. I mean, I guess there still is, but most people have cell phones in their house as their primary phone, they're not using landlines anymore, right? So it would definitely, for reliability, I think, be positive.
Did they ever address the issue that it's close to an air phone? Or did they?
Well, it's federal, so they would have to comply with federal regulations, which now Canada is a federal body, they would have to look at compliance there as well.
Okay, any questions from our online guests? All right, Mr. Cole?
Thank you. I noticed in the report about the cell tower, they talked about topping the trees and nobody on council asked about that. Is that a concern, or does anyone want to comment on the topping tree aspect of the proposal?
They want for the tower.
Yeah. I don't
So-
think it-
Okay, sorry, just cut out a bit there. I didn't quite hear.
But the conversation obviously isn't finished because we are waiting on another piece of information, so. He will have no input as to whether we chop those trees or not. In fact, that might be the largest tree right here.
And so is council considering a taller tower and not topping the trees? Does that sound like that was an option? Guess I'm just putting it out.
Watching tonight, Mr. Cole. I don't think the appetite is strong for any extra height there.
Okay, I guess that's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Derek. Okay. With that, we move to adjourn. Move second, okay. Stick around for